A military police officer is found shot in the living room of her apartment in Brás, São Paulo. Her husband says she shot herself. The police recorded it as a suicide, and in theory, the case would be closed. But there are some things that are inconclusive. The neighbor heard the shot at 7:28. He called for help at 7:57, almost 30 minutes later, and the blood was already coagulated when the firefighters arrived. The gun was fitted into the victim's hand in a way that, according to experts, didn't seem natural. And after she was taken by helicopter in a very serious condition, the man took a shower, even though the police asked him not to. And it was already the second time that morning, because he said he was in the shower at the time of the shooting. Today, the court is investigating the case as a femicide. But what exactly happened in that apartment? What do the reports say? And what did the cameras record? And also, what still remains unanswered? That's what we're going to break down in today's video, without speculation, just facts in the order they happened. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome here. Every week there are several episodes, so subscribe so you don't miss any updates or recurring episodes. Become a member if you can, it helps me a lot. Like, comment, even an emoji, and let's get to the facts. On February 18, 2026, military police officer Gisele Alves Santana, 32 years old, was found shot in the living room of her house in the Brás neighborhood in São Paulo. She was lying between the sofa and the television stand in the living room with a gunshot wound to the head, weak but still breathing. At 8:55 a.m., she was then transported by a military Police Eagle helicopter to a hospital, but she was in critical condition and her death was confirmed at 12:04 p.m. Her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Geraldo Leite Rosa Neto, 53 years old, was the one who called for help. And from the very beginning, his version was always the same. His wife had shot herself. At the beginning of the investigation, he was not considered a suspect, accused, or indicted, nothing like that. He presented himself as someone who was cooperating with the authorities. But to understand what happened that morning, I think we need to know a bit about the context of that marriage, don't we? Gisele and Geraldo dated in 2023 and got married in 2024. She had a daughter, already 7 years old from a previous relationship, and the little girl lived with them on the day of the tragedy. However, the girl was not at her mother's house with her stepfather. She was at her maternal grandparents' house. The family themselves later said that the girl wanted to stay there because of the frequent arguments and fights between her mother and stepfather. Later, Lieutenant Colonel admitted the marriage was in crisis. He said that for the past 6 months, the couple had been sleeping in separate rooms and that the problems started when they stopped working in the same battalion. That's when insinuations of infidelity on his part and jealousy on her part began to appear, feelings that gradually undermined their relationship, until, living under the same roof, they could no longer live together. When Geraldo told Gisele that he preferred a divorce, she, according to him, took it well. And it was this desperation in the Lieutenant Colonel's aversion that would have led her to shoot herself. Gisele's family, however, disputed this aversion right from the start. They said she wasn't depressed, she was very attached to her daughter, she loved life, and that, contrary to what Geraldo claimed, it was she who wanted the separation. The husband's aversion and the recorded call. Geraldo said he was in the shower when he heard the shot. So he got out of the bathroom and found Gisele already shot, lying on the floor of their living room. Then he called for help, and that call was recorded.
Military Police Emergency Lieutenant Colonel Nudo. My wife, who is a female police officer,
ela se matou com um tiro na cabeça. Manda o resgate, uma viatura aqui agora, por favor.
O senhor verificou a respiração dela, senhora?
she's in very bad shape. She shot herself in the head. Send rescue right away.
And here, as excellent investigators, you must have noticed a detail in this call. At a certain point, the operator asks if he had checked his wife's, the woman's, breathing. The lieutenant colonel's answer indicates that the victim was still showing signs of life, even though he had previously stated that she had killed herself. Then he says, she's in very bad shape, she shot herself in the head, send rescue right away, okay? What happened in the following hours was this. The paramedics managed to revive Gisele at the scene at 8:55 a.m. She was then airlifted, still alive, to a hospital while the paramedics worked there. Inside the apartment, the husband remained in the building's hallway on the phone, talking to his superiors. One of the calls, in fact, was to Judge Marco Antonio Pinheiro from the São Paulo Court of Justice, who arrived at the scene at 9:07 a.m. Then the two men went up to the apartment together. At 9:18 a.m., the judge reappeared in the hallway. 11 minutes later, the lieutenant colonel appeared in different clothes, and witnesses stated that he supposedly took another shower during that time. Even though he was advised by the police officers present not to do so, military police officers who took part in the incident stated that he returned with a supposed strong smell of chemicals. The forensic team later found blood in the bathroom, and it is stated that the judge, whom the lieutenant colonel called, was summoned to the apartment as a friend of the lieutenant colonel, and that any clarifications from the two will of course be presented to the judicial police. Naturally, the family's lawyer wants to understand all this, right? Later that day, in the late afternoon, 3 women who identified themselves as military police officers went to the apartment to clean it. According to available information, the action was authorized after the forensic team had finished their work. The goal here is to spare, let's say, Gisele's family, right? When they went there to collect their daughter's belongings, they would be faced with that complicated scene. It is reported that the initiative came from Gisele's own superiors, not from the lieutenant colonel. Well, at night, the building's security cameras recorded the lieutenant colonel returning to the apartment accompanied. After staying for more than an hour, he left carrying clothes and personal belongings. All these movements outside the apartment are documented by the building's security cameras. About the condition of the apartment, the reports from the forensic police indicate that the scene was not properly preserved, which prevented the experts from accurately determining the dynamics of the shooting. A video recorded after the rescuers left showed the furniture there in disarray, somewhat out of place, and cleaning cloths scattered on the floor. And the family's lawyer stated that the apartment was a real mess, the place was not preserved. But it's important to clarify something about this point, right, guys? When there's an emergency response, and we've seen this many times in criminal cases here, these emergency responses, the preservation of the scene is almost always compromised, since the first responders sometimes need to move the furniture around because they're focused on the victim, right? So they might end up stepping on bloodstains. The goal is to try to save the victim. So that's kind of a pattern and doesn't by itself constitute evidence of anything. And what are the first inconsistencies raised by the investigators? With the accumulation of information in the following days, reports, statements from neighbors, family members, paramedics, the investigators then decided to broaden the analysis of the case, starting to treat it as a suspicious death and to consider the possibility of femicide. The husband now became a person of interest in the investigation, and the first set of inconsistencies was related to the timeline of that morning, okay? A neighbor reportedly heard a loud gunshot around 7:28, and the husband's call to the police was at 7:57. So, almost half an hour later, the firefighters arrived at 8:13 or 8:14. When they got there, Gisele's blood was already coagulated. And coagulation, guys, starts about 20 seconds after the injury. The process is completed between 5 and 15 minutes, which matches the time reported by the neighbor, not the time of the husband's call. There's a window of about 30 minutes separating the two time references. In addition, a firefighter reported that the husband didn't have any blood stains that would indicate he tried to help the victim in any way there. Geraldo's behavior during the response was also observed and reported to the investigators. While there was intense activity inside the property, he moved away, went out into the hallway, and stayed on the phone, as we saw. But it's also important to say that each person reacts to shock in different ways, right, guys? But despite that, the incident was recorded. What did the forensic experts observe at the scene? 3 specialists analyzed all the available evidence. It's important to point out that none of them are part of the official investigation. Their analyses are technical, based on the images from the inquiry and the released reports. The main point raised by the three was the position of the weapon in Gisele's hand. Rodrigo Almeida Rodriguez, a paramedic with 15 years of experience who responded to the incident, said that the weapon was very well fitted in her hand, in a way that he said he had never seen in cases where the shot was fired by the victim themselves. He considered that scene so unusual that he decided to photograph it before anything could be changed. Very wise, isn't it? Francisco Helmer, director of the National Association of Federal Criminal Experts, who made it clear he was not involved in the investigation, explained why this draws attention. When someone shoots themselves, they lose consciousness immediately and their muscles completely relax. So what usually happens is that the arm drops and the gun falls from the hand. The cases where the gun remains in the hand after the shot are very specific. Usually the person was sitting on the couch or on a bed, and this position ended up preventing the gun from falling. That specialist, Helmer, pointed out that it's not impossible for someone to commit suicide and keep the gun in that position, but the situation raises doubts. A second expert, who preferred not to be identified, added another point based on the images from the investigation. Gisele's hand, the one holding the gun, was practically free of bloodstains. When someone shoots themselves in the head, it's expected that there will be droplets of blood on their hand. The absence of this raised, in his words, the possibility that the gun had been placed in her hand after the shot. Adding to these elements, the bullet casing was not found at the scene. Also, guys, of course, you need a forensic specialist. But there is also other evidence that could prove whether the shot was fired by her or not. There are several tests. I won't even go into details here because I didn't find anyone talking about it. But there are other, I would say, elements of scientific evidence, very detailed analyses in short, that could certify whether it was from her hand or not that the shot came from there. But anyway, regarding the weapon, a .40 caliber Glock owned by Geraldo himself. The lieutenant colonel explained that it was kept in a box in the bedroom, on top of the wardrobe, usually locked with a key. That day, according to him, the door was open and the ballistic test did not find any gunpowder residue on Gisele's hand or on Geraldo's hand. But it's also worth noting that the absence of residue is not conclusive. In certain circumstances, this can happen even if the person fired the weapon. Another point here that requires a deeper and more specialized analysis, right? If there's any expert watching us here, please leave a comment, and I'll definitely pin your comment if it contributes to our discussion, the reports, and the exhumation. The autopsy report done on February 19th, one day after Gisele's death, already pointed out injuries on Gisele's neck, but did not classify them as blunt force injuries. Given all the doubts that were raised, the family then requested the exhumation of the body so that new examinations could be carried out on March 6th. So the court authorized it and the new report was straightforward. Injuries on the face and cervical region caused by pressure from fingers with nail marks on the skin. The document technically described blunt injuries caused by digital pressure and abrasions consistent with marks. Ungual, we're not speaking in technical terms here, right? A second examination, also carried out right after the death, had also identified injuries consistent with digital pressure, okay? But the first report hadn't given this the proper attention. It's important to make it clear that both reports indicate that the gunshot to the head was what caused the death, okay? Gisele didn't die from asphyxiation, strangulation, or hanging, but the marks on her neck and face were recorded and need to be explained. In the course of the investigation, the experts also observed the absence of typical defensive injuries on Gisele's hands and arms. Based on the new evidence, on March 10th, the São Paulo court determined that the case should be investigated as femicide and no longer as suicide, as stated in the initial report. With the progress of the investigation then, the lieutenant colonel was temporarily removed from his duties. The relationship and two key pieces of evidence. As the investigation progressed, Gisele's family and people close to her brought reports about the couple's relationship. According to them, Geraldo didn't allow her to go to the gym without him and even forbade her from wearing makeup or high heels. But it's important to say that there's a difference between perceptions and evidence, right? And the investigation, of course, will need to separate one thing from the other. But two concrete pieces of evidence were presented in the case. The first is an exchange of messages between Geraldo and Gisele's cousin made through her profile on a social network that her husband had access to. The lieutenant contacted the cousin and made it clear that he didn't want his wife. Talking to him, the young man explained that they had known each other since childhood and that there was no romantic interest. Geraldo ended the conversation. The screenshots of this exchange were added to the case, and the second piece of evidence is more direct. Geraldo sent Gisele a video in which he appears pointing a gun at his own head, threatening to kill himself if she left him. Worried about the threat, Gisele then forwarded the video to her mother, father, and brother. Shortly after, she deleted the file herself, but her brother kept it, and this video became one of the most important pieces of the investigation. Geraldo's response to all this was that the video is fake, produced by artificial intelligence. Regarding the marks on the neck, he stated that they were made by Gisele's own daughter, who, according to him, had the habit of holding onto her mother tightly. He also added that he has the habit of biting his nails, and because of that, physically he couldn't have left the nail marks on her skin. Geraldo's defense, Laite Rosa Neto, stated that they did not have access to the exhumation report and at first did not comment on its contents. Therefore, we have some doubts up to this point, but where does the case stand now? The investigation is still ongoing, obviously being conducted in parallel by the civil police and the military police. The case is now under judicial secrecy. So many loose ends still remain, and possibly until everything is resolved, they will stay that way, at least for us, the general public. Gisele's family is represented by attorney Dr. Jose Miguel Silva. And a detail that completes the picture of this case is that on February 18th, the same day Gisele died, the official Gazette of the state of São Paulo published her promotion to work at the São Paulo Court of Justice. Just look, a salary increase of approximately 30%. I would say it's a very unusual irony of fate and really sad, isn't it? It's a great misunderstanding that ended in a tragedy that is, above all, sad and regrettable. A very young mother leaves behind a daughter, still very little, who will grow up without her mother. That in fact happened in that apartment. The police will obviously have to respond since it's an investigation. But from everything that's been raised so far, what we have for sure are many things that need further clarification, right? I also want to express here our sincere condolences to everyone who knew Gisele, especially her family. And we hope that this case is resolved in the way it needs to be and that there are no doubts left about what happened there for all these reasons. So, if you feel comfortable, the therapeutic space in the comments is there for us to talk a little more about this case. And if there are any updates, of course, I'll be back here with you. In another episode of Ruivo News, I thank you so much for your company, a kiss from Ruivo, and see you in the next episode.